There are 10 places across Eastern Europe that the governments who built them would rather you could not find. Some were wiped off the official maps. Some were sealed behind concrete walls and guarded by men who answered to Moscow. What nobody admitted at the time was how many there were, scattered from the Baltic forests to the Black Sea coast, behind a curtain that no longer exists. Stay through to number 1, because the strangest of them sits alone on a Bulgarian peak called Buzludzha. A concrete flying saucer, built for the Communist Party in 1981 and abandoned 8 years later. Number 10. Beelitz-Heilstätten, Germany. If you had asked a wealthy Berliner in 1900 where to send a relative dying of tuberculosis, they would have told you to go southwest, into the pine forests below the city, to a brand new clinic that smelled of resin and fresh air. They had no idea what those buildings would go on to hold. Beelitz was built from 1898 as a sanatorium, a small city of around 60 buildings spread across 200 hectares of woodland. The clean air was the medicine. For a while it worked exactly as intended. Then the wars came, and the clinic became a military hospital. In the autumn of 1916, a wounded lance corporal arrived with a shrapnel injury to the leg, taken at the Somme. His name was Adolf Hitler, and he convalesced here for nearly 2 months. 30 years later, the army he led would send a new generation of wounded men through the same wards. In 1945, the Red Army took the site and never really gave it back. Beelitz became the largest Soviet military hospital outside the Soviet Union, and it stayed Soviet for almost 50 years. Its last famous patient was Erich Honecker, the deposed leader of East Germany, treated here for cancer in December 1990 before he fled towards Moscow. The Russians finally left in 1994, and the wards fell silent. What stands now is a vast complex of empty surgical halls and collapsing staircases, the paint peeling in long, pale curls, half of it still fenced off and unsafe. A clinic built to keep people alive outlived 3 regimes that did the opposite. And if Beelitz outlived its regimes, the next place on the list was undone by something far simpler: water. Number 9. Rummu, Estonia. Picture a turquoise lake in the Estonian countryside, clear as glass, with the roofs and walls of a prison rising out of the surface. That is not a film set. That is Rummu, about 50 kilometers southwest of Tallinn, and the buildings beneath the water are real. Rummu began in 1938 as a limestone quarry with a prison built on its lip. Under Soviet rule, it became a forced labor camp. The inmates were marched down into the pit each day to cut stone. And to keep the pit dry, those same prisoners ran the pumps that held back the groundwater. The water was always trying to get in. Day and night, the pumps pushed it out, and the work went on at the bottom of a hole that the earth wanted to fill. Then Estonia regained its independence in 1991. The Soviet system fell apart, and the forced labor ended with it. But when the prisoners stopped pumping, nobody else took over. The groundwater rose without anyone to stop it. It kept rising until it had swallowed the lowest cell blocks, the workshops, and the machinery left exactly where it stood. What you find now is one of the strangest swimming spots in Northern Europe. The water is cold and astonishingly clear, and divers drop down through open windows into rooms that have not held a prisoner in decades. From the hill above, you can still read the shape of the prison through the surface. A place built to keep men in was undone the moment they stopped working. Number 8. Tskaltubo, Georgia. 10 kilometers west of the Georgian city of Kutaisi, there is a ring of grand neoclassical palaces with chandeliers still hanging in rooms where the floors have fallen away. They were not palaces. They were bathhouses. Tskaltubo was known as the spa capital of the Soviet Union. The mineral springs here run warm straight out of the ground, and the Soviets believed in the right to rest, so they built a town to deliver it. 19 vast sanatoriums and 9 bathhouses set in parkland, served by 4 direct trains from Moscow every single day. At its peak in the 1980s, around 125,000 people came here every year on state-funded holidays. Stalin himself was a regular, and one bathhouse was built specifically for him, fed by the radon-rich water he believed eased the pain in his legs. Then the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, and the holidays stopped overnight. The trains from Moscow simply did not come. The grand resorts emptied, and the tiles, pipes and radiators were stripped out for scrap. But the buildings did not stay empty for long. When war broke out in nearby Abkhazia in 1992, around 250,000 ethnic Georgians fled their homes, and thousands of them were given shelter in the abandoned sanatoriums of Tskaltubo. That was more than 30 years ago. The shelter was meant to be temporary. Instead, children were born in these crumbling halls, grew up beneath the chandeliers, and had children of their own. Today, the developers are circling, the fences are going up, and the families who made homes inside an empire's holiday resort are being moved on at last. Tskaltubo was abandoned by accident. The next place was destroyed on purpose by the very people who loved it most. Number 7. Kupari, Croatia. On the Adriatic coast, about 10 kilometers south of Dubrovnik, 5 hotels stand burnt and hollow above one of the most beautiful beaches in Croatia. This was Kupari, and for decades it was the most exclusive seaside resort the Yugoslav army had. The first hotel here, the Grand, opened in 1920 for wealthy holidaymakers. After the Second World War, the Yugoslav military took the bay for itself and built 5 more hotels around it, with room for 1,600 guests and a campsite for 4,000 more. Officers brought their families. Tito kept a holiday villa nearby. A bed at Kupari was one of the quiet rewards of loyalty. Then Croatia declared independence in 1991, and the same army that had sunbathed here turned on the coast. During the siege of Dubrovnik, Yugoslav warships shelled the resort from the sea. The hotels survived the shelling. What finished them was deliberate. After the bombardment, soldiers looted the buildings, stripped out anything of value, and then set fire to them, burning the hotels down floor by floor. What is left now is 5 concrete skeletons, roofless and scorched, ivy climbing through the window frames while families sunbathe on the sand a few meters away. The sea is the same color it always was. The hotels behind it will never take a guest again, and in early 2025, the demolition of the first of them finally began. The men who turned Kupari to ash had spent their own summers in its rooms. They knew exactly what they were burning. Number 6. Spac, Albania. High in the mountains of northern Albania, at the end of 13 kilometers of dirt road, a cluster of rotting concrete buildings clings to a barren hillside above an old copper mine. This is Spac, and of everything on this list, it is the one Albanians most want remembered, and the one their governments have been slowest to save. Spac opened in 1968 under Enver Hoxha, the Stalinist dictator who sealed Albania off from the world more completely than almost any leader in Europe. It was 2 things at once: a prison for political enemies and a forced labour camp where those enemies were sent down the mine. The valley was chosen because nobody could escape it. Hundreds of men were worked to death in the shafts below. This is the point where the list stops being a collection of curiosities. People died here in living memory for the crime of disagreeing. On the 21st of May, 1973, the prisoners of Spac did something almost unheard of in Hoxha's Albania. They revolted. For 3 days, they held the camp, and they raised the Albanian flag with the communist star torn out of the center of it. The state crushed them. 4 of the leaders were executed by firing squad. 8 more were handed an extra 25 years. If you are finding these places as fascinating and as grim as I do, hit subscribe, because there is a version of this story for every corner of Europe, and I am working through all of them. And stay with me, because the last 3 on this list are not just abandoned. They were official secrets. Spac closed in 1990, when the regime that built it finally fell. The flagpole still stands. Number 5. Skrunda 1, Latvia. While families in Georgia were quietly raising children inside one empire's spa resort, that same empire was building whole towns it intended no one to know about. Skrunda 1 was one of them. Deep in the forests of western Latvia, Skrunda 1 was a closed military town built from 1963 around 2 enormous early warning radars. The radars faced west, scanning the skies over Europe for American missiles and feeding everything they saw back to Moscow. To run them, the Soviets built a complete town for around 5,000 people. 10 apartment blocks, a school, a theatre, a gymnasium, and shops. And officially, it did not exist. Skrunda 1 appeared on no public map. It was named in the standard Soviet fashion, after the nearest ordinary town and a number, and the people inside it lived behind a fence the surrounding Latvians were never allowed to cross. A radar that powerful is hard to hide, though. The locals knew something was out there, because the giant installation jammed their television and radio signals for miles around. Then the Soviet Union collapsed and Latvia became independent. The Russians were allowed to keep the radar running for a few more years, but the deal came with an ending. In May 1995, a team of American demolition experts wired the unfinished radar tower with explosives and brought all 19 stories of it down in seconds on live national television, while Latvians watched and cheered. The last Russian soldiers left at the end of the decade. What remains is a ghost town, the maps never admitted to, slowly pulled apart by looters and birch trees. A secret city that outlived the secret. Number 4. Wünsdorf, Germany. About 40 kilometers south of Berlin, behind a padlocked gate in a fenced-off pine forest, a statue of Lenin still stares across an empty parade ground. Behind him stands the largest Soviet military base ever built outside the Soviet Union. And for 40 years, East Germans were forbidden from going anywhere near it. The Germans had a name for it. Die verbotene Stadt, the Forbidden City. Wünsdorf had been a garrison long before the Soviets. The Kaiser's army used it, and Hitler ran the German High Command from here before the invasion of Poland. But it was the Red Army that made it a city. At its height, around 60,000 people lived inside the wire. 50,000 of them soldiers, with their own shops, their own schools, and a daily train that ran directly to Moscow. The timing of how it ended is almost too neat. The soldiers inside Wünsdorf watched the Berlin Wall come down in 1989 on their own televisions, knowing exactly what it meant for them. They held on for another 5 years. Then, in the autumn of 1994, the last of them were given barely any notice and pulled out for good. When the local Germans were finally allowed inside the gates, their grandparents had been turned away from. They found meals still sitting on tables and pets abandoned in the empty quarters. 6 square kilometers of barracks, theatres and bunkers sit behind a 17-kilometer wall, slowly returning to forest. 2 statues of Lenin still stand guard over a country that no longer exists, watching a city no one was ever supposed to enter. Number 3, Goli, Otok, Croatia. 2 miles off the Croatian coast, there is a bare, sun-scorched island of white rock with almost no shade and no fresh water. Its name means the Naked Island, and for 40 years it was the place Yugoslavia sent the people it wanted to disappear. Goli Otok opened as a secret political prison in 1949, the year after Tito broke with Stalin. The first inmates were Yugoslavs, suspected of staying loyal to Moscow. Around 13,000 people passed through it, sentenced to hard labour in the quarries under a sun that gave no mercy. What made Goli Otok different was the method. The guards forced the prisoners to torment one another, to beat, denounce and inform on each other until each man was both victim and jailer. Remember the maps from the start of this list, the ones these places were quietly removed from. Goli Otok was the purest example of all. The island was erased from official maps. Prisoners were shipped over in sealed livestock wagons, so they could not learn the route, and anyone released was made to sign an oath of silence about what they had seen there. The stone they cut was carried to the mainland and laid as tiles in towns full of people who had no idea where it came from. A whole country walked on Goli Otok without ever knowing it. The prison finally closed in 1988. The buildings stand empty now, baking on the rock, reachable by a half-hour boat ride in summer. And if a place could be hidden in plain sight like that, imagine what a country could hide in a forest. That was the next one's entire purpose. Number 2, the Duga radar, Ukraine. Deep in the forest of the Chernobyl exclusion zone, a wall of rusting steel rises almost 150 meters into the air and runs the length of several football pitches. From the ground, you cannot see the top of it. The Soviets called the site Chernobyl 2. The rest of the world called it something else. The Duga was an over-the-horizon radar built to spot American missiles the instant they launched, thousands of kilometers away. When it switched on in the mid-1970s, it began transmitting a sharp, repetitive tapping that burst onto short-wave radios all over the planet, jamming broadcasts and aircraft channels from Europe to North America. Nobody outside the Soviet Union knew what it was. The tapping earned a nickname, the Russian Woodpecker, and the Soviet Union flatly denied that the radar existed at all. On their own maps, the enormous structure was marked as a children's summer camp. When a foreign journalist later asked about the giant wall of metal on the horizon, he was told it was an unfinished hotel. Then, in April 1986, the reactor a few kilometers up the road exploded. Chernobyl made the whole area uninhabitable. The most secret radar in the Soviet arsenal was simply abandoned where it stood. It is still there, too radioactive to dismantle and too enormous to hide, looming over a forest almost no one is allowed to enter. A machine built to see the end of the world, left to rust inside a disaster it never saw coming. The Soviets hid the Duga in a forest. For our final place, a regime did the exact opposite. It built something it wanted the whole world to see and then walked away from it forever. Number 1. Buzludzha, Bulgaria. On a remote peak in the Balkan Mountains of central Bulgaria, more than 1,400 meters up, there is an enormous concrete disc with a tower beside it, sitting in the cloud like something that crash-landed in the night. People call it the spaceship. Officially, it was the house monument of the Bulgarian Communist Party. This peak was chosen for a reason. In 1868, it was the site of a last, doomed battle between Bulgarian rebels and the Ottoman Empire, a fight so one-sided that only 4 of the rebels are said to have walked away alive. Then, in 1891, a man named Dimitar Blagoyev gathered a small group of socialists on this same mountain in secret to lay the foundations of what would become the Bulgarian Communist Party. So when the party wanted a monument to itself, it came back to Buzludzha. The building was the work of the architect Georgy Stoilov, Construction began in 1974 and took the better part of a decade, with much of the labour and money raised from ordinary Bulgarian citizens. It was inaugurated on the 23rd of August, 1981, the year of the 1300th anniversary of the Bulgarian state. Inside, it was extraordinary. The great circular hall was lined with sweeping mosaics of workers, soldiers and party heroes. Tens of thousands of pieces of coloured glass, crowned with a hammer and sickle at the centre of the ceiling. It was built to hold the faithful for 1,000 years. It lasted 8. In 1989, the regime that built Buzludzha collapsed along with the rest of the Eastern Bloc. The party that owned it dissolved, and no one who came after wanted to pay to keep a temple to communism standing on top of a mountain, so they simply left it. The doors were stripped, the roof began to fail, and the Bulgarian winters got in. Snow and ice tore at the mosaics from above, while looters tore at them from below, prizing the glass tiles off the walls by the handful. What stands today is a ruin on a windswept peak, the great red star on its tower long since shattered, the hall open to the sky, the faces in the mosaics dissolving one winter at a time. In recent years, conservation groups have fought to save it, and a grant from the Getty Foundation has paid to study how it might be rescued before it is lost completely. For now, it simply waits up there in the cloud. A flying saucer built to last 1,000 years, abandoned after 8, slowly being taken back by the mountain it was meant to crown. 10 places across 8 countries, behind a curtain that has not existed for a generation. Some of them were hidden on purpose, struck off the maps by the states that built them. Some were sealed away for soldiers and spies. And some were simply abandoned the moment the system that paid for them ran out of money or nerve. What links them is not communism exactly. It is the particular habit of a certain kind of state to pour enormous effort into a place, a prison, a radar, a monument, a town, and then to vanish and leave that place standing as evidence. The maps have been redrawn, the borders have moved. The ideology that built all of this is gone, but the buildings are stubborn. They are too big and too expensive to remove, so they sit there in the forests, on the peaks, and under the lakes, outlasting the certainties that made them. There are more of them than I could fit into one list. There are always more. Subscribe, and we will go and find the next 10 together. Thank you.